In 2019, Cineworld held a multi-billion-pound valuation as a titan of global entertainment. By August 2022, its shares had collapsed to penny stock status on the open market, erasing nearly its entire capitalization. At its peak, the company's operational footprint spanned 10 countries. They controlled more than 9,500 screens across hundreds of locations, making them the second-largest cinema chain on the planet. This scale was not the result of slow, organic theater construction. Cineworld built its empire through aggressive consolidation, absorbing regional and international competitors to rapidly expand its market share. The strategy accelerated in 2014 with the acquisition of Cinema City. That single merger absorbed operations across Central and Eastern Europe and Israel, pushing Cineworld's net assets past the £500 million mark. In 2018, Cineworld swallowed Regal Entertainment Group for an implied enterprise value of $5.8 billion, dwarfing its historical operations. To close the deal, they paid $3.4 billion in cash, funded entirely by $4.1 billion in new debt facilities. Initially, the leverage paid dividends. In 2019, the combined entity generated a record $4.4 billion in revenue, yielding $475 million in profit. Cineworld had secured market dominance across the US and the UK, but their balance sheet was heavily loaded. To service the massive interest payments on that debt, their thousands of screens had to generate steady, uninterrupted ticket sales. In December 2019, they initiated their next move. Cineworld offered $2.8 billion to acquire Cineplex, a deal that would hand them 75% of the Canadian box office market. 3 months later, COVID-19 brought the exhibition industry to a standstill. By mid-March 2020, Cineworld closed its global estate of nearly 800 theaters. This chart plots the damage. Revenue fell from $4.37 billion in 2019 to $852 million in 2020, an 80% drop in a single year. With theaters closed, ticket sales vanished while fixed costs remained, generating a $3 billion pre-tax loss for 2020. Without incoming cash, loans used to purchase Regal Entertainment suffocated the company. By late 2021, Cineworld's net debt stood over $4.8 billion. Factoring in long-term lease liabilities for thousands of empty cinema properties, total financial obligations reached a staggering $8.9 billion. The debt model that fueled Cineworld's rapid expansion required constant cash flow. When the pandemic paused their ticket sales, the leverage that built the empire immediately tore it apart. Desperate to stop the bleeding, Cineworld's management looked for ways to conserve their remaining liquidity. In June 2020, they announced they were terminating the pending acquisition of Cineplex. To justify the cancellation, Cineworld argued that Cineplex had breached the merger agreement.
They claimed the Canadian company strayed from ordinary operating covenants by deferring rent and delaying payments to film distributors during the lockdowns. Cineplex rejected this claim and sued for damages. The dispute landed in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, under the purview of Justice Barbara Conway. The central issue in the courtroom was a specific provision in the acquisition contract known as the Material Adverse Effect Clause. This clause dictates who bears the risk if an external event destroys the value of the deal before it closes. Justice Conway examined the contract and noted that outbreaks of illness were explicitly excluded from the definition of a material adverse effect. By signing the agreement, Cineworld had legally assumed the risk of a pandemic. Because the contract exempted pandemics, the court ruled that Cineplex's cash-saving measures were reasonable responses to government mandates, not breaches of ordinary course. Cineworld's decision to walk away was deemed a repudiation of the contract with no valid legal basis. The resulting penalty was devastating. The court awarded Cineplex $1.24 billion Canadian dollars for lost synergies, plus $5.5 million for lost transaction costs. Cineworld attempted to save cash by abandoning a target it could no longer afford. Instead, their misinterpretation of a contractual risk allocation left them with an unsecured liability of nearly $1 billion payable to a company they didn't even own. By mid-2022, the company was completely trapped. They were attempting to service $8.9 billion in total obligations, manage a $1 billion legal penalty, and survive on ticket sales that remained well below pre-pandemic levels due to a delayed film slate. In August 2022, Cineworld hired the law firm Kirkland & Ellis and the consulting group Alex Partners to prepare for Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings in the United States. The path to insolvency was accelerated by internal fractures. A year prior, the board faced a major shareholder revolt regarding executive compensation during the worst months of the crisis. Nearly 30% of voting shareholders formally opposed a long-term incentive plan that awarded a £65 million share package to the CEO and COO, approved while the company was deferring salaries and furloughing its global workforce. Filing for Chapter 11 provides a corporation with legal protection from creditors while it restructures its balance sheet. This process requires a comprehensive deleveraging transaction, where debt is exchanged for equity, severely diluting existing shares. For the company's architects, the restructuring exacts a steep price. The debt-for-equity swaps necessary to save the underlying theater operations will effectively wipe out the Greidinger family's 20% ownership stake. A global pandemic emptied the theaters, but the underlying financial architecture was already fragile. By relying on billions in debt to fund its rapid expansion, Cineworld ensured that a temporary pause in revenue would cause the entire structure to collapse under its own weight.